Welcome to A Way Forward. I'm your host, Maaria. This is a show where we break out of our digital echo chambers, dig in deep, speak in nuances, and understand there's always more to one side of the story. This is where we uplift our humanity one conversation at a time. My guest today has been on the front lines of emergency medical care in Gaza and Lebanon and is going to help us think about a way forward when it comes to, as he has said, seeing the humans past the numbers. Dr. Ahmad is a board-certified emergency medicine physician working at Advocate Christ Medical Center in Chicago, where he also serves as the Global Health Director and Medical Ethics Director for the Emergency Department. He has served in Gaza at Nasser and Al-Aqsa Hospital and in Lebanon during the ongoing conflict. His time in Gaza is portrayed in the powerful new documentary, American Doctor, that premiered at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Welcome to A Way Forward, Dr. Ahmad, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we'll get into the premiere that it had at Sundance, but I actually wanted to start our conversation at a much more personal grounding level that introduces you as an individual. What inspired you yourself as someone who felt that you needed to do emergency medicine? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with my background as a second-generation Palestinian American, somebody that was born at Cook County Hospital in the west side of Chicago, born and raised in Chicago. And I think this idea of emergency medicine is something that I gravitated towards as I learned more and more about the history of Palestine, as well as some of the issues that were kind of really interrupting the ability for people to live in Chicago for a long time. The health inequities, the way that healthcare was just not being delivered in a way where we were necessarily helping people. And I just saw that connection globally, where I really thought long and hard about what was the best way that I could be effective at helping people. And I think medicine was something that I first thought of, and then emergency medicine, really being in the emergency department, being sort of that initial point of contact for folks who are coming in there unsure of what's happening to them, fearful, oftentimes the worst day in somebody's life. And for me, it was just something that I really wanted to be a part of, and something that I gain a lot of satisfaction from. And I think that, again, it goes back to how I was brought up. It's this idea of being part of a diaspora with people who are struggling or are suffering, and making use of the privilege that you are born with, making use of the resources that are available to you, and giving back to the community that you live in, that you're a part of, but also the community that you came from. And so I think all of that really influenced my decision. I couldn't think of anything more effective than being in the emergency department.
So you took ownership of the fact that you witnessed some commonalities between what you had heard and what you had known growing up as a Palestinian, of inequities and dire medical situations. And you saw the same thing in Chicago, so you could connect that. So it's interesting for you to answer this question that way, because I think for a lot of people, they don't recognize the similarities, the human experience, right? The human similarity. And I wonder if seeing two different parts of the world and the same type of situation, has it somehow made an impression on you on just the human resilience and the human spirit when there are situations where there's medical dire need of humanitarian relief?
Yeah. It's very personal for me. So, if my father, he was 9 years old when he developed a throat infection, strep throat, okay, and he was in Palestine growing up. And ultimately, he got complications as a result of that, and had to have heart surgery, emergency heart surgery. That, the infection just kind of caused all of these complications, ruined the valves in his heart. And because of the lack of access to healthcare, the lack of, healthcare literacy in Palestine at that time, is something that changed the trajectory of his life. And ultimately, he's no longer with us. He passed away, a few years back. And I do believe it's a lot to do with the fact that he didn't have access to healthcare. Well, I work on the south side of Chicago. I work on the west side, and I see, young African-American men who have all of these sorts of conditions that, if they had the resources available to them, if they had the access to the healthcare that they deserved, they would be living a lot longer. They wouldn't be dealing with those complications. And so these things are like front and center. I think about it on an individual level. I'm not thinking about this on a system level because everybody already has articulated this. Everybody knows the system is broken and it needs to be fixed. But when you start thinking about the dads that are now going to be coming home to their young children, you start thinking about the moms that are suffering in labor because of complications, because they didn't have access to the care that they needed. If you start thinking about even food deserts in Chicago or checkpoints in Palestine, you know, if you start thinking about those faces, those people, and, you know, their stories, it becomes very personal and it's hard for you to ignore.
And I think it's powerful for you to create that analogy. And I think it's necessary as well, because unless we create analogies, we can't really have empathy for another individual that's experiencing similar things that your aunt or your uncle could experience here. Now, one thing you spoke about, and thank you for sharing the story of your father, the access to healthcare and the access to healthcare literacy. Can you go into a little bit detail on that? Because I think people don't understand that within food deserts, there's also healthcare access deserts within Chicago, and that similarity there in Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I want my patient to have all of the tools available to them. I want them to be informed. And I want to use that word very specifically into what it means to be somebody that's informed. At the end of the day, the way the system should work, the way that the healthcare system should work, the way that even government services should be provided, it's supposed to give you the tools that you need to be able to thrive and to succeed. And so if you're not aware that you've got high blood pressure and it's just sitting there for years, sometimes decades, there's a reason that medical professionals will refer to high blood pressure as a silent killer, because it will absolutely sort of stew in your body, causing all of these different issues. And for whatever reason, there's this sort of lack of investment. There's this idea that these sorts of human lives aren't worth as much, or they maybe don't have as much potential. And so when you see whether it's, you know, these ambulances that are being stopped at checkpoints in Palestine, or the fact that you see that maybe a young woman who has lower socioeconomic status somewhere in Chicago, Detroit, New York, or wherever it is, she would need to hop on 3 different buses or drive 45 minutes to be able to see a primary care doctor. Then you can start to at least fill in the dots with respect to how come the life expectancy when it comes to this group of people is so much lower, even though they live, for example, in a first world country like the United States. And it's, you know, these are the types of things that I think eat at the potential that a community has.
When you go to Gaza and you meet young men and young women, because I know that there's nurses there and there's doctors there, what do you take away from how they see themselves and their mission in medicine, and how does that impact you and your responsibility as a physician?
For me, it's something I always come away from those environments, despite the overall sort of sadness and the tragedy that's sort of immersed in those environments, inspired by the people that I come across. And the reason I say that is the way that they pursue life passions and professions and personal and professional development is truly inspiring, because there is a purpose behind it. It's not just, personal success. Of course, that's a part of it. You see that everywhere. But there is also that sense of responsibility of, you know, taking advantage of any opportunities that come their way and giving back in however they can, and being a productive member of society and having a positive impact. And that's something that I think, you know, at least in the medical profession, I think that's something that we can all learn from. One thing I think people would find quite interesting is in many parts of the world, especially in Palestine, if you want to pursue a healthcare related field, let's say we'll take a doctor, for example, you have a college entrance exam that you need to score at the very top percentile. These people are the top 1% in Palestine that are being afforded the opportunity to go to medical school. And they do not for 1 second take that for granted. They want to be the best possible physicians that they can be. The medical students that I interacted with in Gaza, in the midst of everything that was happening, as the entire world around them was crumbling and falling down, were showing up every single day early and ready to learn and staying late and really wanting to make sure that they could be the best possible doctor that they could become. And healthcare is only one sector where we noticed that. We saw the same thing when it came to media and journalism. We saw the same thing when it came to engineering. People who really wanted to perfect their craft. I found that incredibly inspiring. And it's something that when I came back here, it gave me it reignited sort of the idea of what am I actually doing and what sort of impact can I have? Like, what am I actually doing for the people that I'm serving and the people that are showing up to my emergency department? That's the stuff that I got from Palestinians.
Now, I know that we've seen numbers and we've seen things on social media, and there's been videos and there's been incredible journalists giving us as much as they can. I know it's heavy and I know it's hard, and you go back there again and again to Palestine to be able to serve. And I want to know what kind of personal talk, other than that personal obligation of being Palestinian American, what kind of human talk do you tell your soul that makes you want to keep going back? And I don't mean to have you go there because I know it's difficult, but what kind of devastating things have served you as inspiration and not just tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that you're always sort of asking yourself as you're getting ready to try to go back and try to do what you can and stand in solidarity with your fellow healthcare workers. When you're speaking to your colleagues who are on the ground and you see sort of the obstacles that are in their way and the things that they're willing to do to continue to go back to the hospital and to get up in the morning and go to these 24-hour shifts that they're working as there are, fighter jets flying above and drones and, you're just hearing active bombing and it's relentless, endless stream of patients. You see them continue to show up and you're like, I've got no excuse. I mean, what am I talking about here? And we're talking about when it comes to Palestine, just to give folks just a little bit of perspective here. There has not been a single hospital that wasn't affected by some sort of bombing, that wasn't, had electricity cut off, that didn't have critical medicine shortages. And like so much so that when the flu was spreading all throughout Gaza, doctors didn't have Tylenol to give these kids who are miserable with fevers and didn't have sort of the breathing treatments or the inhalers when they were struggling with their asthma because all of the dust that's arising. These are tough conditions. We call it, in medicine, we talk about moral injury. We used to say burnout, but really it's moral injury that you're suffering here when you're seeing sort of things that are out of your control affect people that are helpless, that are looking for help, and essentially are, did nothing to deserve the sort of issues that they're having to confront. And when I saw so many of these doctors showing up, despite what I had just mentioned with these hospitals not being safe, with them oftentimes being raided, many of these doctors had been abducted, 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed, ambulances have been shot up and blown up, and to see them get up in the morning from whichever tent they were in whatever camp they were in that moment, and make that dangerous trek to the hospital, put the gown on, and continue to serve patients and to try to make sure that they prioritized and centered the patient's dignity by trying to find whatever they could to keep them covered, by calling them mother or calling them aunt or uncle or my son or my child. Those are the types of things you don't forget. And you start to realize, okay, these folks are special and they're doing something that's incredible here. And the least that I can do is try to find the energy, despite myself feeling so down and feeling depressed, finding that energy to keep pushing forward. Because if they're able to do that, I've got no excuse. And you kind of give yourself that sort of like, all right, let's go. Let's show up. Let's do what we got to do. And, I always look to them and I'm always talking to folks on the ground and they've consistently sort of kind of came with that sort of attitude and that perspective. And it's something that I learned a lot from.
You spoke about children and you talked about families. What are the children experiencing when they meet with you? Have you felt that your role and the way you communicate to the child and how you interact, it has immense value of even addressing their trauma even a little bit?
You bring up a really, really important point and a question that I think most mental health professionals are thinking about. Even in active war zones across the world, you can name any war zone that you can think about. Different child-focused groups like Save the Children or Children Not Numbers, what they focus on is trying to create a safe space and environment for children. Even that in the middle of a war zone, they'll talk about building like a park because that's how important it is for these children. And I think one thing that is so different about Gaza is, other than the fact that it's a tiny, tiny place, less than the length of a marathon, 26 miles long, is that, it really was really tough to find a place safe for any family, any person, and people had been displaced so many times. So a child that needs stability needs safety and security to be able to at least feel enough comfort to continue to kind of, grow and develop and thrive. Those things were being taken away. And I think what we saw was families had started to gravitate towards hospitals and seek refuge in hospitals. They weren't sick, but they were sleeping in the hallways of hospitals or around the compound of a hospital. And so we would see a ton of kids. And there's a couple of things that you notice. First, everything about their lives had been disrupted. There was no stability. School was out. They were not, even seeing their pediatricians. They weren't getting to play outside as much. But they really were craving social interaction. I mean, Palestinian society in general is a very social and community-oriented society. So, if you're walking down the street, you're supposed to say hello to the, elderly neighbor. You're supposed to help out somebody who's carrying a bunch of bags. They're supposed to kind of, give you some crap if you're not doing well in school. Yeah. Everybody knows each other in a way where you can ask these sorts of things. And what you saw these kids were doing is they see these international doctors showing up. You'd see people like us, and they would just try to interact and talk. And, oftentimes it comes up like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what are you doing? Or asking us if we had any chocolate. And so you started noticing that these conversations, these interactions, that these, that was a role that you could play, is you can sort of provide that something new for this kid who all he's been used to for the last 2 years is hearing a bunch of fighter jets, having to pick up with whatever stuff that he has with his family and move to a different camp location, and then still deal with sort of the hunger that was at play there. And so it definitely was challenging, but the thing that's incredible about children in general is that they are resilient. And I think something that I still think about and concerns me is, there are these sort of scars that are not visible that everybody deals with when you're dealing with sort of trauma, loss. And I just hope that, after talking to these kids, how much they were yearning to go back to school, or how much they wanted to start playing soccer again, or just even them being able to go to the beach, you hope that that's something that can return, because those are the keys that they need to be able to kind of get back to a sense of normalcy. I don't think anybody's going to be normal after kind of what's taken place. But again, you want to sort of help create the conditions that are there. And so it's a question that I think is important, because it's often glossed over because it's not acute trauma, right? It's not like active injuries. And it's not like, okay, this child was born and has this medical condition. This is something that, is focused on mental health and wellness. And that also too came under fire.
And internalized, right? You internalize the chaos that you see. And we see, as people of faith, we see children as examples, because if you can't look anywhere else, if you can't control your anger or your ego or your narrative that you have been told, look at the children and argue with that. Just defend this child that's just sitting there without a parent, without someone to care for, roaming the hospital hallways, looking for someone to say, tell me where I belong and tell me that I do belong. I just want to thank you for that. And I wish more people understood that how children are treated are a way for us to reflect on our humanity.
There's something I would say there, because I think you bring up such an important point. I think one thing that I've noticed, and I've come to a conclusion to, is if people were prioritizing moral consistency and principled values and really kind of approaching this from that lens, we would not be in the position that we're in. And I think it's a lack of that sort of moral courage to center children, to center people who really have, should be protected or should have their rights defended.
100%. And I think what you bring up is that your moral compass has to be challenged. If you do not have a moral compass that's triggered and moved when you see children suffering, your moral compass has to be challenged, because then it is definitely tainted. And I think the issue of how many deaths have occurred, you've already moved away, because your humanity has moved away because that one child was 100% enough.
And you'll see more people say things like, this child's parents are this. Like, okay, but that's the child is not guilty of a parent's crime.
Right, absolutely. But that is a narrative that you can use to take away your humanity and shut your moral compass off, because the power of children dying is so incredibly an undeniable truth that should not happen. And if you can not have to face that truth, you'll do everything to be able to not have to face that truth. And I think that is an issue with humanity. You either choose your humanity or you don't. I want to go to the documentary, American Doctor. There's two doctors that you traveled with. One is a Palestinian Muslim yourself, a Jewish and a Zoroastrian. And you navigate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and you advocate for change in Congress. And I wanted to know, how did you feel, and if you felt that there was momentum and how you jump the hurdles of what you're presenting and the conversations you're having. Did people think it was propaganda? Or when you were in these conversations, was it so undeniable that people were moved as you moved through the halls of Congress?
Yeah, I mean, you had a bit of everything, and you
Mm-hmm.
did notice, I think, over the time because we've been doing this, heading to DC, just trying to talk about this for 2 years. I mean, whether it's a member level meetings or you're meeting with the actual congressperson or you're meeting with the senator, to their staff, to the intern who's been there for 3 days, we've had all sorts of meetings, and we've been in positions where, the meeting is a place where the person is not taking any notes, and they just kind of repeat the same thing over and over to you.
Talking points.
Essentially, yeah, this is my
Sure.
boss's position, and they're steadfast in that position. And then there are moments where people get very emotional. People, there were some, because we're a group of doctors and nurses, a larger group of people who had volunteered in the last 2 years in Palestine, in Gaza, and you saw sorts of people go about it differently. So we're all different types of backgrounds. You mentioned the three doctors that are in this film. We're all very different. We all come from different backgrounds. And I think one thing I'll say is, I think there was a breakthrough within the American public. At one point, the American public was beginning to connect the dots and see that actually Palestine, Gaza, the Middle East is not a far, far away land. And a lot of the people that we elect and that we put into office, they're making decisions, and their votes are affecting what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening globally. And some of the people, I think many people, were very uncomfortable with what was happening in Palestine and the images that they were seeing of families, of grandfathers, of children. They were not happy with that. It was just we noticed that shift over 2 years. We noticed the different dispositions of these offices because the people that they were representing were calling and they were emailing, and they were not happy about what was going on. And there was a shift, one party more than the other, but there was a shift in general. And I think for me, that's something that we wanted to drive home. We wanted to make sure that nobody was able to convince the American public first that this was a disconnected issue and that this wasn't relevant. We wanted people to realize that, hey, the decisions that are made here in the United States are having a real effect on what's happening in the ground in Palestine, but are also taking away from some of the issues here in the United States that these people should be tackling, and that they should be sort of approaching.
And I think that no matter what side of the aisle you are on, whether you're an Israeli child, a Jewish child, a Muslim child, a Palestinian child, no child or family deserves to suffer these types of situations and conditions. And doctors believe that, right? Because when they take their oath, they believe that. So who better than to give this message of where we should be as far as where our moral compass should be? And I want to thank you for doing that. I want to end with this. I want to come back to a quote in one of your testimonies, because I know you testified at the UN as well. And you said the importance of seeing the humans past the numbers. If we get lost in the numbers and we just debate about that, what about that number one, right? How, in your view, can we uplift the humanity of those who we see only in photos, only in TikTok, only on videos, and who may seem like another news story in a constantly running facet of news? And I say that because the exposure will go up and down. So in the last 2 years, we've seen it go up and people have been more educated, more informed. You have these delegations going to Congress, but then once it goes up, it can go down. So how do we make sure that we keep people's attention and not just following the trends, but we stick to that place, like we stick to that human place in our soul where we recognize something has devastatingly gone wrong? I think, a film like The Voice of Hind Rajab is an example of that, right? It's like you lock in and it's very difficult for you to pretend that we can forget something like that. And so what is the role of media, and what is the role of yourself and your interaction with media to be able to keep things front and center, to uplift the humanity of those who have suffered in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to center the voices on the ground in a way that you're actually doing justice by their stories, or in the case of somebody like Hind, her memory. I think it's important for us to realize exactly what you said, that, hey, these news headlines, they will cycle in and out. And there needs to be this sort of separate track where we are making sure that people don't forget this and we share it. The thing about Hind is the audio of that recording is undeniable. undeniable. You don't need to speak any language to hear the voice of a 6-year-old or to understand the terror that she was experiencing as you heard the tank fire its hundreds of bullets into that car. The story of somebody like Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, he's a pediatrician. He refused to leave the hospital where he was taking care of the kids there. His son was killed on the compound, his 18-year-old son, Ibrahim. And he's somebody who has written 2 New York Times op-eds. He's still abducted. And so it's like, I want to still mention him. I want to still bring what's happened. I think it's the responsibility, of course, of the diaspora, but of conscious citizens everywhere who don't want to see that, repeated anywhere else in the world. It's by making sure that when you think about what's happening here, you center the stories and the voices in a way that I can't dismiss the story about a father whose entire family is beneath the rubble, and he's day by day using his hands to try to pick up the pieces so that he can give them a proper burial. So I think these things, all human beings will absolutely feel it. They, for the most part, I truly have not encountered somebody who rejects these sorts of stories. It just resonates with them, however they believe about what's taking place here. And I think it's on us to do that. I think if I can get people to hear the audio of Hind, or people to take a look at Dr. Hassan's articles, or to see a picture of Soul of My Soul, the grandfather who buried his granddaughter and then himself was killed, I think that's all I've got to do. I don't got to say much else. I think it speaks for itself on a human level.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. And I want to say that, one thing you said, that it's the responsibility of people in the diaspora and the responsibility of the Palestinian people. But I would say it is the responsibility of every human to inform themselves, and then to not deny what they see, and then also to connect the dots and have some sort of role where they are constantly uplifting humanity. And I say this again and again, it's like this idea that if we in 2026 have become a world where we are only interested in pointing fingers to who is more egregious as a people, who is to blame, and we go down this discussion, and it's a very, very grave and significant distraction to take away from voices like the doctor you mentioned. And these individuals are not alive anymore to speak for themselves. And so it's so important for us to, no matter what political party you're in, no matter where you're from, if humanity is showing you something and you have seen it, stay awake to it, and bring as many people as you can to go forward to be able to have humanity address issues of dehumanization. I want to thank you, Dr. Ahmed, not only for your service, for you taking ownership of the fact of what you can do to be able to plug yourself and to make lives better for somebody, but more importantly, to tell the stories of children and families who cannot tell the stories. So I thank you so much, and I appreciate you for your time.
Of course. Thank you. It means a lot coming from you. I appreciate that.